You're listening to The Pivot Point, where we unpack the defining moments that shift careers and lives. I'm your host, Laura Dionisio, founder of Lead Intact, and my mission is to spotlight the raw, real stories behind career pivots, the fears, the hopes, the messy middles, and the bold decisions that follow. If you're feeling stuck or quietly wondering what's next, I hope these stories help you see yourself a little more clearly and inspire you to start moving toward your own dream life. Let's begin. Welcome, Laura, to the Pivot Point podcast. I am so grateful to you for saying yes to this. And just so the listeners know, Laura and I have known each other, well, we first met 20
years ago.
Oh my God, that's insane.
It's been a while.
A little bit. Yeah, 20 years ago. The amount of time we've known each other can almost buy alcohol. So thank you for being here. I'm just going to go ahead and read your bio so people get an idea of who you are and what amazing things you've done so far. Laura Hubelbank joins us from New Hampshire, where she has built a 20-year career in engineering and program management, leading global teams as an engineering manager, project manager, and most recently, director of program management. As a self-proclaimed grammar nerd, Laura enjoys critiquing resumes and helping her colleagues succeed in their own job searches and career pivots. And this is why I wanted you on here. After personally navigating 2 major layoffs, including one in 2020 that left her job searching for 8 months and another in 2025, she's currently embracing a career break. As an outdoor enthusiast, she spends her days mountain biking, boating, and learning how to play pickleball. Laura enjoys volunteering at her local food pantry and her personal favorite, and also my personal favorite, managing the growing social media empire of her 2 young cats, Zoe and Ziggy. Thank you so much, Laura, for being here.
I'm thrilled to be on this podcast, and honestly, it's because you reached out and I really wanted to support, your career endeavor with your career pivot, but also just kind of help other, women and other colleagues in their careers.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I love that you just on your own help critiquing resumes and helping your other colleagues succeed. And, in case the listeners don't know, I always ask an intention for the guest, like what their intention is in coming on. And I don't normally ask it when we're recording, but Laura's was so beautiful and so in line with the mission of the Pivot Point that I'm going to ask Laura to share. So Laura, what was your intention in coming on here today?
I mean, basically, I've had my own career struggles, my own career pivots, so I wanted to be able to kind of give back and just share my personal experiences and knowledge to help others out there, especially women in their career endeavors, because coming from engineering, it's a tough path. I mean, my graduating class of electrical engineering was 10% women. And it's a very different journey. And so having basically advocates and mentors on your side makes a huge difference.
Yes. I love it. And I particularly want to talk about like what you said in your bio, Laura, about personally navigating 2 major layoffs, and that in 2020, it was like 8 months before you got it. But I'm sure at that point, you didn't know it was going to be 8 months. You probably had no idea how long it was going to be. So walk us through that experience. Like, what was it like? What was going through your mind? And also, what did you do in those 8 months when you were job searching?
And so, the very first layoff I experienced, basically, I had landed my dream job in 2018, right? And I went to a big med tech company. There's about 80,000 employees. I was working at a very small self-contained site up in New Hampshire where we had about 200 people. And it was fantastic work environment. I loved my colleagues. I loved the work I was doing. Career advancement was really where I wanted to be focused on. And I had only been there, I think it was about 9 or 10 months. Thursday morning, they went and had a meeting with one section of employees at our site. And they basically said, we're discontinuing your entire product line. All of you folks are basically losing your jobs, most of them effective immediately because they're just canceling all work related to that product segment. I was in the other product segment. And so 2 hours later, they had an all hands meeting for everyone at our facility. And, first announcement was that they had discontinued a portion of those products. And then the second announcement was we are transferring all of the engineering and manufacturing support work from the site in New Hampshire out to Colorado. And 1 year from now, we are shutting down this entire site. So I actually
Mm.
had a year advance notice that I was going to be laid off because the choices were you lose your job or you move to Colorado. And the complicating factor with that is my husband also worked at the same company.
Same sector or
Yeah, we're in the
would
same
you?
business unit, same site in New Hampshire. So all those
Oh,
things that applied to me also applied to him.
wow. Okay. Walk
So
us through
that's how
what
this
that was
started.
like.
Yeah,
I
so
really want to pause there because I am imagining listeners who also have partners, and I'm just imagining, I'm not sure if this was the case for you, but imagining the listener just being like, yes, this is my situation right now. I don't know what to do. Like, what was the conversation like between you and your husband?
the initial just like shock of, well, what's
Hmm.
happening? And luckily for us, we had a full year before it was actually, the time when they had the layoffs. And we were given a pretty generous layoff package. So what my husband and I actually planned to do is we bought a camper and we planned to take a 3-month road trip across the entire United States. And then we're going to come back and find new jobs, which was a fantastic plan, except our layoff date was the end of April in 2020.
Oh,
Now,
well,
do we know what happened in March of 2020? Does anyone recall? Small little mishap,
minor detail.
minor details. So basically, our grand plan of, okay, we're taking our career break, we're going to have this amazing experience, as a couple together, and then we're going to come back and find new jobs and continue our careers. Everything shut down. We had camping reservations from New Hampshire all the way out to California for this 3-month trip. Everything was canceled, couldn't go anywhere. And so we said, okay, well, I guess it's time to find a new job since we're clearly not going anywhere. And, I did take a little bit of time off because at the beginning of COVID, companies had no idea how to run their businesses, how to have remote employees. They certainly didn't know how to hire people.
Hmm.
So starting around the August timeframe, so about 4 months in, I said, all right, I'm going to start, really looking for a new position. And there was not a lot open. So again, just looking online, LinkedIn, checking for basically a similar type of job. I was a
Hmm.
senior program manager at a medtech company. I really wanted that similar role because it had been such a good fit for me. And I applied to dozens of jobs. The company I worked for, 80,000 employees, international. I reached out to other divisions within my former company saying, hey, I was an employee. I'm really interested in working for your division. I even had some, personal connections. Nothing.
Hmm.
Full interviews, several positions I was really excited about, but, nothing panned out for the first several months.
Hmm.
And
And
it's
how did you keep going? And did you like what was your, I guess, emotional landscape as each time you thought you got excited about something and then you heard like, oh, not this. Like how did you keep going and keep
I
staying
mean, you don't really
motivated?
have a choice, do you? Right? I mean, most of us are
Hmm.
working because we need an income. So it was really just keeping my eyes open, being hopeful, again, fine tuning, my own resume, how I was presenting myself, making sure that I was identifying if there was any gaps in how I was presenting myself or the types of jobs that I was looking for. One of the benefits of getting laid off is we were given career transition services. And so you have a coach to basically help guide you through the process and give feedback. And you can do, mock interviews and they'll, critique your resume, those types of aspects. And so it it absolutely helps to have a support system as you're going
Hmm.
through this. I know in my intro, I'd said I really love critiquing resumes. I do find it fun. If
Hmm.
I asked my husband to look at my resume for me, his eyes would glaze over and he would be zero help.
Yeah.
So again, this is where you need to have the right network of people. I have basically two women that I worked with, the former MedTech company that we also ended up at the same college, 15 years prior. And so
Hmm.
we had our own little pod of just like women in engineering and project management where we would bounce ideas off of each other, talk about job leads, and really just have that sounding board. And that was tremendously helpful to have, again, just like close friends and colleagues that you can trust that will give you an honest opinion. as you're
Yeah,
going
I
through this
love
job
that.
search.
Yeah, I love that. I'm thinking of because I actually have a client, actually, we talked about this. I have a client who is going through job transition right now. And one of the things that we are working on is, my client's mindset, because their mindset is like looking through, because you mentioned you looked at your gaps, right? With my client, this person would look at their gaps and be like, this is why they wouldn't hire me. And just overall have like a pessimistic outlook. So
Mm.
like if you were to talk to, like, you're mentoring someone who feels that way, who's just like, I am, 8 months into to being laid off, trying to find a job. I'm not hearing anything. I'm sending out like 10 resumes a day. Like, what would you say to that person?
So and again, because I just recently had a layoff, and so I'm also with these, career transition services. And one of the biggest pieces of advice that they give is the first thing you are supposed to do when you're looking into a
Hmm.
career transition is self-reflection. So
Self-reflection. Say more about that.
self-reflection. So basically, you need to think about what type of role am I interested in? What type of company would be the best fit for me? Do I want to work with a domestic team? Am I open to working with a global international team where I'm trying to juggle time zones and coworkers in other parts of the world? You know, what type of technology really drives me? And so finding what's the best fit for you and your personal skill set helps line up, again, looking for positions, but ultimately obtaining a position that's the best fit for you and your personality and your strengths. And
Hmm.
so I do believe that is step number one, because then that drives all of the subsequent activities, updating your resume, looking for jobs. Because if I say, hey, I love working remote, which I do, I think it's a great way to have better work life balance and just be able to be more present in your everyday to day life as opposed to spending an hour commuting each way. So if I say I'm really looking for a remote position, but then in my job search, I'm focusing on ones that are, on site 4 days a week, and it would be an hour and a half to try and get into Boston. That's not going to ultimately lead to a good end result, because there's going to be this big disconnect between what I truly want for my core values versus what, those companies are offering. And so being able to understand yourself and then align that with the right type of position. And then, I mean, the other thing is you never want to take a job out of desperation. It,
That's
it just
100% what I
it
was going to
typically just
ask you
does not
next.
end well.
Yeah.
And
So
yeah,
the person though, first of all, I love that you're saying this as of the time of this recording. You're not just saying this from a point of, oh, this is 2020, like 5 years ago at this
no,
point. You're
this
like, no,
is
I'm
right now.
yes. And what I love and what the listeners I think can take not only with what you're saying, but kind of like the energy, the confidence and calm that you have. And so I'm just thinking about like my client and other listeners out there who are worried. And I love that you brought it up. You're like, don't ever just take a job just to take a job. So how would you balance like a compromise versus like the best fit for you, especially like the remote job thing? I hear it a lot. And actually it is true. There aren't a lot of remote jobs out there anymore compared to like 2020, 21. So what would you say to someone who's like, no, but I got bills to pay and I need to have a job tomorrow? Like, what do you mean? Like, I can't consider what would be best for me. I just need a job.
I mean, if somebody is in that situation, you may need to accept a job with the understanding that it's a short-term career move,
Mm,
right? The difficulty is employers don't really have loyalty to their employees anymore. And
right.
certainly that can go the other way as well. And so there's, contract positions out there where it's for a set duration of 6 months, 12 months, something like that, which could be a really good option as you continue your job search to really find something that's a better fit.
Hmm.
It's just you have to be cautious because you don't want to burn bridges, right? You don't want to
Right.
back out of a commitment where it's an employer that would be someone you'd have a future interest in.
I love that answer so much because it still goes back to self reflection, which is like maybe you do have to take this job that's in person 5 days a week and requires you to work 10 hour days, but getting real with yourself as to like, what does that mean? And have a game plan for like, okay, maybe you save for this amount of time so that you can actually take your time and, look for a job that you actually like. So if step one is self reflection, what would you say step two is in this process?
I mean, the second step is, again, once you've kind of figured out what you really want, is to go and then update all your credentials that will help you get there. So when you're job
Hmm.
searching, again, updating your LinkedIn profile, updating your resume, networking with colleagues in that particular industry, and really just starting to put yourself out there and saying, hey, I'm looking for a new role. Who can help, find that connection for me? And
Yeah.
and then again, the step beyond that is again starting to go on the interviews, evaluating, the companies and really figuring out, is this a good fit or is this not?
I love it. And you know what? You just said something like casually that I don't, that in my experience talking to people who've been in this position don't necessarily say it with such confidence. You just said, hey, you just network and tell people that you're out there looking. And I have heard a lot of people, there's almost like a feeling of like shame, like they don't want to ask for help. Or did you at any point like feel that way, even about like back in 2020, like you felt weird about posting about it? Or, and what would you say, if not, what would you say to someone who does feel that way? Because I've heard that a lot. I'm sure you have too.
Yeah. I really feel that in recent years, kind of the stigma around that has changed a lot because there have been a number of layoffs and a lot of really talented people were let go through no fault of their own. And yeah, I mean, reaching out particularly to strangers, because you go on LinkedIn, and they'll say, "Oh, here's a second or third level connection." But people will do that. They'll reach out and say, "Hey, I've noticed this position at your company. Any chance you could tell me more what it's like to work there?" The job that I ultimately ended up going out to, one of my friends who was part of my little networking team, she said, "Oh, this former colleague is working at that company now. You should reach out to her." I hadn't talked to her in well over a year and a half. It was a colleague I
Mhm.
barely knew when I was working at my former company. And I just reached out and said, "Hey, I want to say, I'm interviewing with your company. How do you like it? How's the culture? Can you give any, advice, recommendations?" And it is a bit out of a lot of people's comfort zone, but the reward that you end up getting from it really, really is worth the risk. And the only risk really is that someone says no or you get ignored.
Yeah, that's true. And I love what you said about how, because I think part of the shame is like that there's something wrong with me that I got laid off. But to your point, lately, unfortunately, there have been a lot of people who've been, a lot of really great employees who've been laid off through no fault of their own. So if you're a listener out
Yeah.
there and you are feeling discomfort, feeling a little bit of shame, like Laura said, there's nothing to be ashamed about. And also, sometimes you have to do the uncomfortable thing, right?
Very true.
To really
And
get
again,
there.
nobody likes interviewing. And I mean, I I do not enjoy that aspect because again, you're in the spotlight and people are asking you all these difficult
Hmm.
questions. It is not an enjoyable place to be. Luckily, with my career, I've had the benefit of being a hiring manager many times over. So I've been the one doing the interviewing. So I at least know kind of what questions to expect and how to respond. But it's never an easy place to be. It's uncomfortable. You're not your natural self when you're in that
Hmm.
environment. And
Hmm.
it's really just kind of breaking through that barrier to try and show your authentic self when you're putting yourself out there on interviews or networking or any kind of, career endeavors that feel a little bit scary.
Yeah. So, what are some ways that you have broken your own barriers of like discomfort, whether it's interviews or reaching out to someone? Like, what are some of the things that you do to help you do that?
I think a lot of it's practice, right? So again, the more you practice, the more you get better, the more comfortable you get. I would say, again, things I'm not comfortable with, being on this podcast. I have never let somebody video me for an hour and say, "Oh, and I'm just going to put this out on the internet."
Thank you, Laura, for being here.
I'm here because again, I know how it can benefit others, but also I'm growing a skill in myself.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And for the listeners, since you mentioned you were uncomfortable with this, again, thank you so much. I mean, we haven't seen or spoken to each other in 20 years, and I'm like, hey, do you want to be on camera and recorded and out into the internet? Like, I
Why
really
not?
appreciate that. Yeah, why not? Seems fun. So tell the listeners, what did you do specifically in the case of this podcast interview to help you prepare, help you settle the nerves a bit, just so the listeners have an idea of like, because this is basically an interview. So they can take what you've done for this podcast interview and apply it themselves for their next interview.
So I guess one thing that I did is, one of my fun side projects I've been working on these past couple of months while I've been unemployed is my two cats have their whole social media accounts. And we've started on YouTube, and I just made my first couple of long form videos where I'm
Hmm,
actually talking and narrating.
have
And
to watch it.
so basically the past couple of weeks, I said, "All right, I'm going to go and I'm going to make this amazing cat video. I'm going to record my voice. I'm going to come up with a script It probably took me 8 hours to do a 4-minute video of the cats because I have no clue what I'm doing using the video editing tools, recording myself, re-recording. I sent it off to my friend and say, hey, what do you think? And she comes back and in the nicest way possible is like, you kind of sound like a robot.
Oh, no.
But again, excellent feedback.
Mhm.
And again, if you're nervous about interviewing for a job, have a trusted friend or colleague do a fake interview,
So
right?
good.
Practice, tell me about your career, practice your elevator pitch. Like doing things over and over, you get more comfortable with it and you start to do it without thinking about it and worrying about the minute details. And it becomes more natural, more authentic. And so, again, these cat videos, I'm like, all right, scrap having a script. I've got a couple main points and I'm just going to like talk from the heart and see what happens. And yeah, I still had to re-record a couple times, but it was just a lot easier, a lot more authentic, a lot more natural. And again, I think in careers, it's the same thing. You have to kind of practice and again, understand where am I nervous? What aspects are causing anxiety and become more
Mhm.
comfortable with them.
It goes back to the self-reflection.
Where are your
Yeah.
gaps and how can you help address those?
I love that. I'm so glad you brought that up because I think most people, when they think of gaps, they immediately think of like, what certification do I need? What degree do I need? But to your point, it's not just that. It's also like your interview skill gap, like not just the things that you have in your resume. And you know what
Or
I
it could
love
be
too? First of
a
all,
networking gap
mhm.
too, right? It could be, hey,
Yes.
I'm on LinkedIn, but I only have 6 connections. Okay, well, get out there and start filling in your network and growing it because that's an area that should be focused on.
I love that you brought this up. What are some other gaps to consider besides the obvious like resume gaps? So we talked about could be networking, could be interviewing. What are possible gaps that the listener can think about, like when they're doing their own self reflection?
I mean, you had mentioned certifications, and again, there's certain hard skills where, yes, if you're targeting a specific role, I'm a project manager, right? So having PMP, project management professional certification, that's one of those things you got to check the box and say, yep, I have that. So again, having those key certifications are absolutely a skill gap that people can focus on. But a lot of times people don't even think about soft skills. Again, do you have experience giving presentations, doing mentoring? You know, just again, being able to listen and hear colleagues and disseminate information and so many soft skills that people could always use a little bit of extra work on. Yeah, so I mean those kinds of things. And I'm just trying to think because it's really, if you're looking at a career pivot where it's a different type of work or different skills than what you currently have or you're currently used to, I would really advise reaching out to others who are in those roles already and saying, what do you do for your job? What are the most important aspects? Again, if you want to go into sales, you better get used to people telling you no.
Right.
And it's
I
funny
love
because
that.
there are so many people who are afraid of asking for whatever, just because they don't want to be told no.
Hmm.
So again, it's really just looking at how can you make yourself a more holistic and just more attractive employee? What is your own personal brand that sets you apart from other job candidates? And I mean,
Mm.
in this day and age, one of the big buzzwords is using AI, right?
Yep.
So it's funny because talking with family, with friends, I've noticed probably about a 50% adoption rate of people who are starting to use ChatGPT and the other AI tools. But it can be tremendously helpful. You want to fine tune your resume? Go into ChatGPT and say, hey, here's the job description. Here's my resume. What do you recommend? Show me how can I improve my written resume? What are some potential questions I'd be asked during an interview? So those types of tools can be tremendously helpful for building your own skill set, but also making you a more attractive candidate when you're looking for a new job and just saying, hey, I'm up to date with the latest technology.
Yeah. I love that. And you said something that I think is, I don't know if it's fairly new or maybe it's just fairly new to me, but the whole idea of like, what is your personal brand when it comes to, I guess, or would it be, I guess, your professional brand? Can you speak
Yeah.
more on that? Because at least for me, like that's something fairly new that I just learned like maybe in the past year. So for those who aren't familiar, like what is a professional brand and why is that important?
If you think of job searching from the hiring manager's perspective, they get dozens and dozens of resumes and they're going to look at each one for what, 10, 20 seconds before they kind of make a snap judgment. And so that's where right up front, you need to say, this is what I'm selling you about me as a person. I'm a program manager, I'm collaborative, I've worked on product development, I've worked in a large international company, I've resolved these types of issues. And so that's building your brand. And once you get past that initial hurdle, that's when you actually move into the interviewing phase and really having the opportunity to say, okay, well, here's the whole picture. So your
Mhm.
brand is your snapshot of yourself to say, this
And
is why
that's on
you
the
want to talk to
resume?
me more.
You're
Yeah, it's
suggesting
in your
it's like the top
resume.
part of the resume. Yeah.
Yeah, it's, the top part of your resume with your kind of career summary. And then, but also your LinkedIn profile, your general online presence from
Mhm.
a networking perspective. Again, if you have a friend saying, hey, I want to recommend Laura here for this position, I've worked with her in the past. These are kind of her main characteristics. So it's, again, it's the whole picture where hopefully your day-to-day self aligns with the character that you're putting up as part of your resume and your online profile. I would really hope
Yes.
so.
Yes, integrity is important here. Now, for the person who is not really sure what their professional brand is, like how would you recommend that they go about trying to figure out what their brand is and what to put on the resume?
Goes back to self-reflection, right? What are you really good at? What do your colleagues highlight and say, I've worked with Laura. She is amazing in these particular areas. When you have performance reviews, what's the feedback that's come back from your manager, from your colleagues, where they say you've excelled? And all of that really can help shape what your kind of professional branding is and what you're known for, what makes you unique in the workplace.
I love it. And I also like I wrote a note here because I didn't want to forget it. I just want to go back to the cat video because I think that's amazing. And for those who were listening, can you I will put the links in the show notes, but can you just briefly talk about and I promise my question is related to the cats, but I also just wanted to spotlight the cats for a moment.
So,
Like how did that start?
So we, for the past, 16 years, we'd had two cats that knew we had lost recently. And when the first one passed, we said, okay, it's really quiet in the house. We need to get a kitten. Because, again, just having a 16-year-old cat who slept most of the day wasn't quite the same level of energy. So we went to the local SPCA and we said, I know, we're going to adopt this 14-week-old kitten. That's the loudest cat in the shelter. And oh, yeah, had been put on a 10-day hold because she bit somebody. That's the cat we want to adopt. So that was Zoe. And again, we got her home and the energy levels were the roof. She was pretty insane. So we said, all right, we're going to get her little harness. We're going to take her outside. We're going to put her on a boat. We're going to see what happens. And again, she has no fear. She loves exploring. She really thought it was fantastic being outside. And after a couple of months, she definitely was a mouthy cat. She liked to nibble on her humans. And we read about single kitten syndrome, where if they don't have another young playmate, then they basically pick up bad behaviors. So we literally went and adopted a second kitten to give her a chew toy.
Does she attack the other kitten?
No. So our
Okay.
second cat is Ziggy, and they're both orange, which was a little bit of a mistake because we can't always tell them apart. But no, they love each other. It sounds like a herd of elephants sometimes because they're chasing each other around the house and wrestling and just having a great time. But they groom each other, they snuggle. And Ziggy, not quite as adventurous. He does like getting out there, but not to the same level as Zoe. So again, we just started recording all this video and putting it out on Instagram and on YouTube to just kind of share joy with the world because they're hilarious.
Love that. And when did you start doing that and sending it out?
In August of last year, so just over a year ago.
Okay. Now, I'm curious, just over a year ago, was this before or after you got laid off the last time?
This was before I was laid off.
Okay, so you're already doing this project
Yeah.
before.
So again, I was doing on the side. I did not tell any of my work colleagues that these accounts existed. I told a few
Mhm.
people once I was
Mhm.
laid off. But no, just again, just very much on the side for fun, posting just short little clips of the cats.
They're adorable. They're adorable. I also couldn't tell them apart, so I feel better knowing that you also sometimes can't tell them apart. But the reason I bring it up, not just because I love cats, I mean that is also a true statement. But you know what I noticed, Laura, is that when you talked about like we were talking about like gaps, right? And like how you can become more comfortable because you mentioned you're not that comfortable with interviewing. And you mentioned some of the ways that you practice wasn't necessarily going to interviews, although of course that's an option. But for the listener out there who is so petrified of interviews that they can't even Like they're not even submitting their resume. One fun way to practice the talking is kind of like what Laura did, right? Like it was a transferable skill. It looks from the outside like it has nothing to do with interviewing, but it does, right? Like having to do a script and then realizing, oh, I do better with talking points. It's like a great way to practice. So I bring up the cat video because if you're thinking I have to do very strict, not so fun things to fill in the gaps, no, or to bridge the gap, so to speak, you can
Yeah.
do fun things like go in a kayak with Zoe and Ziggy, I think. Does Ziggy also go in the kayak
He does, but he doesn't
reluctantly?
love it. So we're working with him. He's a much slower transition.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I would be the same way. I
Yeah.
love it. So I want to go through, okay, because like we briefly talked about it. Thank you so much for like you have given so much already, and I'm sure the listeners are taking a lot of notes. And now I'm curious, this time, 2024, the last time that you got laid off, talk to
25.
us about like, this year, 2025, August 2025.
Yeah, it was this summer.
Okay, this summer. So what was the difference in terms of like how you approached it this time versus that first time in 2020?
So this time I basically had 2 months notice where I was out of the office for a week and a half on a trip to Portugal with my mom and my sister and my aunt. Fantastic girls trip. I get back on, Tuesday night. Wednesday morning, I log into my work computer, and that morning, my boss had set up a very vague sounding meeting with him for about 3 hours later. And I get on the call and I joke, I'm like, nothing good ever happens when I go away on vacation. And he's like, yeah, about that. Hold on a second. I need to have somebody join the call with us. And HR pops on.
Oh no.
And so at my most recent company, I was a manager and I had a small team of about 7 people. They informed me that my job was impacted and I had, another 7.5 weeks until it was my last day. And then my very first question was, well, what about the rest of my team?
Mm.
And, again, because my first layoff, the entire facility was shut down. So everybody was impacted. In this case, it was only select people. And so my team was actually not impacted. It was
Okay.
myself and then a few other select people in different parts of the organization. Again, from an ego perspective, that one did hurt a little bit because I'm like, well, wait a minute, why me?
And
And
how
so
did you
again,
work past that?
it takes time to process, right? Because it's kind of like the 5 stages of grief
Mm-hmm.
where, where is it? There's shock and bargaining and really just kind of working through that until you get to acceptance and understanding. And it takes a little bit of time. So my advice would be don't make any rash decisions. Just take a day or two or a week or two and really absorb the information, let it settle, and then start to think about, well, where do I want to go from here? And
So
so
what was the last 7 weeks like then, knowing that you were gonna leave? Like, how did you break it to the team? How did you also have the motivation to still, you know what I'm saying?
yeah.
Like to still show up 100% and, keep going.
So when we were talking earlier about what's your brand, what are you known for? So for me, I was very much known caring about my team, my colleagues, and really helping them succeed. And so my boss, he offered to have the call with my team to let them know what happened. And I said, well, no, I think it should come from me because I'm the one that they
Mhm.
work with day to day. And so I actually hosted a call the next morning to let them know that my role was impacted and what the timeline was. And again, I would say like those last 7 weeks, I'm not volunteering to do overtime and really push myself to go above and beyond, but I made sure that my personal commitments, that I fulfilled them. I was really setting up my team and colleagues who are taking over my work for them to be successful when I exited because I didn't want someone else to be in a bad position just because my job was impacted.
I'm still thinking about because honestly, deep inside me, there's a little bit of pettiness. So,
Well,
so I
but this was
honestly like, no,
so
I get what you're
the first
saying. Like,
layoff
don't impact. Uh huh.
the first layoff that I had 5 years ago, I had to interview my replacement. So my job was impacted because everything was moving out to Colorado. And so I was on the hiring panel interviewing people who were taking my job out in Colorado.
How
So
did you
so this
handle that?
time really was a lot easier.
Okay, but let's go back to 20. How, and I mean, one, I'm curious, but also like I'm pretty sure there are listeners out there who have actually experienced the same thing. And you seem honestly like really peaceful and grounded to me, Laura, but I'm sure there are listeners out there, and honestly, I can think of like a few clients who still feel bitter and still take it personally that they've been laid off, especially when it's multiple times. And so that's why I'm really asking these questions because I'm sure they're like, I want what she's having. Truly, though, because you seem happy, you're lit up, you're still passionate about helping people, and you yourself are going through a transition. So let's rewind back to
I
5 years ago, right?
you have to be at peace with yourself. If you're bitter, that's just a lot of negative energy that doesn't actually benefit the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case where, again, people were interviewing for what was my role, it's not their fault. They had they had no involvement in what happened to me personally. And so it's just kind of separating that. Sure, I could be mad at the company and mad at the direct managers that had made those decisions, but taking it out on an uninvolved third party really isn't fair. And I'm sure if I had said, hey, I don't feel comfortable, I don't really want to be involved in this process, I'm sure they would have let me out of it. But I don't know, I guess in the end you want the company and the overarching team to be successful. And so trying to
Mm-hmm.
sabotage that, it's not a good look. And
That's true.
because again, you don't know who you're going to run into in the future.
That is a very good point.
So if you get laid off from a job and you light the world on fire and just refuse to be helpful, it's not a good professional look, and that can come back in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So again,
Yes.
there's a selfish aspect, right? You don't want to blow up your own professional brand because an unfortunate incident happened and you were impacted by a layoff.
So for the listeners out there, follow Laura H and not Laura D. Don't let the not that I'm saying I'm letting the petty side win, but the reason I want to give voice to that is because I also think it's important to acknowledge that that's how you feel, because pretending that you don't is not helpful either. And to
But
your
you
point,
need
the self-reflection is really important
Yeah, and you need to process those feelings maybe in a more private setting.
in a private setting. Yes,
Yes.
not in the cafeteria by the coffee, and they're like,
Yeah,
"Can you believe they're having me interview my replacement?"
I
You know.
know. Well, and I know we had touched on this briefly when we had talked before this interview, but at my most recent company, when I became a manager, I was only a manager for about 6 months. My boss called me up and said, we're having layoffs and we're laying off half of your team. And so that w so that was 2 years ago where I had to go and be the one on the call with HR saying, "Hey, I'm sorry, your role's been impacted." And it was very interesting because my team of 10, I believe we had 6 people that were impacted. And I would say about half of those folks were kind of like, well, that sucks, but all right, figure things out, move on." And then there's a couple people who really, again, just kind of lit the world on fire, stopped supporting the business. And those individuals had about 6 weeks notice. And again, as the manager, I could very easily tell who was actually trying to continue to do a good job in those final weeks and who just like abdicated all responsibility, stopped showing up to meetings, stopped trying to transition any of their workload. And they were really just difficult employees. And that's where if someone came to me and said, "Hey, would you recommend this
Mm.
person?" I'd have to really think about that answer because I saw kind of how that part of their personality emerged when put into a challenging situation.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a very good point. So like there's the external possible future impact if you decide to light the bridge on fire, but also just like the inner feeling of like, I don't know, I feel like when you actually give in to those petty thoughts, the intrusive thoughts, that you don't actually feel good. Like you still feel just as bad as you did. Maybe
Yeah.
worse because you realize you didn't feel better.
Well, again, it's
So
a
yes.
self-propagating cycle where if you have a bunch of negative
Yeah,
feelings and negative actions, you're
true.
probably going to have more negative feelings and more negative actions and not feel in control of your own life. Where you kind of say, okay, this is a sucky situation, but how can I make the best of it? And you're kind of propagating your own positive outlook and, positive outcomes in the
Mhm.
future because you're trying to say, okay, well, how can I make this work? And then you figure it out and it works out in the end.
I love it. Now, you mentioned that you are embracing a career break. So, yes, you got laid off earlier in the year in the summer, but now you're embracing a career break. So tell us all about that. Like, what led to the decision to be like, you know what? I'm just going to pause. And how were you able to set yourself up so that you could do that?
So aside from being a grammar nerd, I'm also a little bit of a
Hmm.
money nerd.
Ooh,
And
fun.
so that's where it was, again, like well over 10 years ago, I learned about the FIRE movement, the financial
Hmm.
independent retire early movement. Basically since I started working, I have been saving a huge percentage of my income to basically open up options into the future. And so at this kind of phase in my life, I have kind of a really just solid nest egg waiting there. I'm not, again, kind of like financially strapped to have to immediately take a new position because I have the savings to kind of figure things out and see what I would like to do with my life. And at least this time, my husband is gainfully employed. So that certainly helps our scenario this
Right.
time. When we were both impacted back in 2020, we didn't have quite as many options.
Right.
So yeah.
I love it.
Um,
I love it. So listeners who aren't going through a career transition right now or aren't even thinking about it, again, follow Laura H and start saving just so like you are prepared for the future in
yeah.
case something
And
happens or also if you just want to take a break.
because it opens up options. And that's really about setting yourself up for a lifestyle where you're still having fun, you're still enjoying life, but again, you're kind of saving money in the background so that if something unexpected happens, and again, it could be medical issues that can be hugely expensive and you need time off from work or a layoff, but basically you have just like a safety cushion that you can rely on. If you don't use it now, fantastic, retire early when you're older.
Mhm.
It's good to have that in your back pocket as an option.
I love that. So Laura, what is next for you in this next phase? Or you're just still in the break?
Well, right now I'm waiting for ski season to start. I'm really hoping we get good snow.
Me too.
And one day I will figure out the social media thing because I swear it is hit or miss with making these videos. YouTube with the YouTube shorts, the cats usually get, I don't know, somewhere between 2,000 and 30,000 views on a short. I had one that got 7 million views. No idea what I did. No idea. But it got 7 million views and it got me about 4,000 new followers. So if I could figure out that formula, then I'd be rich. But
You'd
no
be
idea what
rich.
happened.
You would be rich. And also I love I love your cat videos. Yes, listener, go follow immediately. I will put it in the show notes. So Laura, thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom. You have such positive energy, joyful and fun energy. And before we wrap up, I have one final question that I ask all my guests. And that is if you were an item in a coffee shop, so you could be a drink or a pastry or anything like that, what would you be and why?
So first, I'm going to have the disclaimer that I don't actually ever buy anything in a coffee shop. That's one of the ways I save money. I know you look shocked.
Oh,
I also live in the middle of nowhere, New Hampshire. We don't have a million great options like you would in New York City.
okay. I love cafes. It's my favorite. That's why I was like, blasphemy. But I
But
understand.
I would say every morning I have my big mug of Earl Grey tea, and it's just
Mhm.
like it's reliable, it's calming, it's soothing. It's just a great way to start the morning. And so
Accurate
again, I
to
think
your vibe.
yeah, no, again, like I'm reliable, I am steady. It just that I think it's a good fit.
Yes. I love it. Thank you, Laura, so much for being on here, for getting past the barrier of your discomfort. I appreciate you so much. And for those who want to know more about you or really more about your cats, how can they find you? I mean, I'll put it in the show notes, but you could just also
Yep.
verbally say
So
it.
if you want to follow two crazy orange cats, go check out Zoe Zesty Claus over on Instagram or YouTube. You can certainly check out their cat antics. And again, we go kayaking with them, we go boating. Coming up into winter, Zoe has adorable little pink snow booties that she wears. So
He
you'll have to
lets you
check
put
out
them
her.
on? Okay, kind
It's
of.
it's a challenge. We're working on it. She usually tries to flick them off right away, but
Are you planning to have a video or do you have a video of you attempting to put the booties on?
oh
I
yeah,
would watch that.
oh yeah,
Okay, I will
it's
search
on
for
there
that.
from this past winter.
I will watch that. Thank you, Laura, again for being here. And listeners, I know you found this helpful. Take notes, follow the account, and come back next time.
All right, thank you so much, Laura.
Big thanks again to Laura Hubelbank for sharing her story so openly. These conversations are such a reminder that no pivot is too messy, too late, or too unconventional. If something she said resonated, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with someone you know who needs it. And when you're ready to start your own pivot, head to www.leadintact.com for free resources or book a free 20-minute call with me. I'm here for you.